like a much to understand the real way of understanding.
The truth is, in Yonah Shoteres Chassidus, the Rebbe brings the word in Ma'ara there from the Rebbe Marash. And essentially, there's an expression that says, Kabbalah took a lakus and put it to a tzir adam. And Chassidus takes a tzir adam and puts it into a lakus. That's what it says.
That's a whole different Indian.
Yeah. That's why it's a little, I mean, there's probably several explanations. My explanation is, based on the Quds, in Quds Yonah Shoteres Chassidus basically says there's four chalkei Torah. Pshat, Remez, Drush, Sod. Obviously, Pshat is easier for us than Sod, because Sod, it's a whole different way of this. Chassidus is Yechida, which is not a fifth. It's not a fifth. It unites all four. It's like the field of energy. Kabbalah does not unite itself with Pshat. Pshat is Pshat. In Kabbalah, there may be Kabbalah in a Rashi, but there's the Pshat of Rashi, it's Kabbalah of Rashi. Chassidus integrates it all and brings it into Aveda. That's basically, you have to learn the kuntas there. So if that's the case, then basically when you learn, let's say, Eitz Chaim, on a pasuk in Pasha Mishpatim. Take the Zohar Pasha Mishpatim says it's about Gilgulim. Pshat, it's about Din Avadivri, and the other dinim in this Pasha. They're irreconcilable in a way. They're definitely, this is the sod of this Pshat. But Chassidus will take and explain something where everything will become one, and you'll suddenly see that Gilgulim itself, that's Avadivri, And then you understand that's really the meaning of Kabbalah. But Kabbalah itself ends up being really an example for the whole picture. And it's one step. Kabbalah is the rung called Seid that's explaining the whole picture. Chassidus is the whole picture. It's really what the Rebbe says there. That's really what it comes down to. So just like Pshat is only one part of the picture, and Remez and Drush, so is Kabbalah. And they're all a beer on another course, basically, which is Chassidus. Like that. It's a pretty radical statement, but it makes sense because Kabbalah is limited to Sod, and Chassidus is not limited to being mystical. Chassidus can be a practical application of Veda. Chassidus is not dafke esoteric. Chassidus is not Kabbalah al pi seichel. Chassidus is elikus, how you live elikus in this life. It's a whole other discussion. This needs another verbringen completely.
You see, you're not Rizal Kabbalah like that.
Kabbalah or Kabbalah. The Rebbe goes through Maidani there, all four Pshat, Remez, Drush, Sod, and then says, but Chassidus is the meaning of Maidani. And then it brings it all together. The truth is, Rabbi Levi made this Chiddush. The Rebbe's father writes in Lekut Levi Yitzchak. If you go to Chelik Tazayin, Lekut Tesichas, and Shmois, and Yusrei, there's a whole thing that Rabbi Levi writes that Yutes Kislev is Yutes, and Yutes is higher than Nigla and Pnimis HaTeirah. Because Nigla the Teira, you needed the Yud Beis Kroyim Kriyas Yamsuf split into 12. The Asad Lava is the Gilead Pnimis HaTeira Sod 7. 12 plus 7 is 19, so Yitzhak Kislev is higher than both. And the Rebbe asked there the question, that's Sicher, how could it be higher than Lasad Lava? Lasad Lava, we have only a taste of what's Lasad Lava. Basically, so Chassidus is higher than Kabbalah, and that's the Nakudah. Anyway. So everything is everything, and then but the problem is we're not everything, so we're like in a little piece, so we're trying to figure out how that little piece fits in, and that's where the problem.
Yes, you got the answer?
Remember your question.
When you speak long, listen, it's like Ayin Beis. When you speak long enough, one thing at least you say, I don't know if I got the answer, but there's more than meets the eye. Not an answer. I think to me the real geschmack's the part of all this is application to our lives. That's what it comes down to. Without that, it is a mind game ultimately. It's like learning Gemara. It's like learning the fine print. You learn Gemara. So it definitely is a good massage for your brain. All the days. But I remember in yeshiva, I used to learn it. It always bothered me. Sometimes I said it and I'd get a slap or something equivalent. And I'd say, so why do we? Why Kamina? You always say my benayu. So they give you a my benayu in the Gemara Gulash Gur. A my benayu in our lives. It always bothered me. And the same thing is here. These people spend so much time doing this. They weren't playing mind games. They weren't just. It wasn't like brain exercises. It's ultimately applications to our lives, and everything has to be applied. when the Rabbeim say that Haskalah, the people who learn Haskalah and they don't bring it to Aveda, it's a waste, or it's even worse. The mamish, there's unbelievable strong l'shemus against those that do that. To me, it's very simple what it means, really. The fundamentals in academic world is compartmentalization. You go to a university, you're taking courses that are not connected to one another. No one's connecting one course to the next. At the end, you take these ideas, and hopefully you do something with it where it helps you in your life, and maybe you could find some parallels. In Yiddishkeit, a fundamental opposite. There's no such thing as philosophy without psychology, to put it that way. Philosophy, an idea of philosophy, a philosophy course in university is intentionally not practical. It's not meant to be. It's not meant to be. It doesn't have to be applied. And in Torah, there's no such thing as philosophy without psychology. Every philosophical idea has a psychological application. Or else, what's the point? Even the highest levels, Lifnei Atzimtzum, a mind of Kamina in our Veda right now. And it's just a different... so really, when someone learns Torah, what you're really learning is everything. Mathematics, psychology, philosophy, history, analysis, homiletics, whatever you call it. All as one. Obviously, when you're learning Gemara, the rules of Gemara. But there's an underlying principle. When he says in Kuntas Eitz HaChaim, the Rebbe Rashab writes the foundation of wise Temchet Mimim. And he says there, he brings the Geras HaKedush Siman Chavav. What's the bottom line there? That Eitz HaChaim is no machlekes. That's Primus HaTeira. Ilona the Tevara, Eitz HaDas. There's machlekes and questions and so on. It's not just, of course, so the Rebbe brings sometimes, what do you mean? You find the difference, there's two opinions about Eidus. There are differences of opinion in Kabbalah and Chassidus. But the point is, the fundamental principle is the unity of everything. In Gemara, you're learning the laws of Kedushin. You're not learning the laws of Nezikin. You don't mix the two. As a matter of fact, halacha karav b'yisura, right, and halacha tishmur b'meina. It's two separate things, two different fields, because it's based on that teiv ra, what's right, what's wrong. In Chassidus, you're learning about the field of energy, basically, that has a bunch of elements. So two opinions. Also, that's why Eilu ve'el divrei Kim Chaim is not really. It's a nigladika statement, Shammai and Hillel, but the Shammai and Hillel disagree. This is kosher. It's not kosher. In Chassidus, there's no problem. They're both right. This is chesed. This is gevura. Nigla doesn't make sense to say such a thing, because halacha, which is the psak, only one. But their theories are both legitimate. In other words, the Chassidus is basically a different way of learning. It's not like we said. It's not learning. You don't learn it like Shulchan Aruch. You learn it like a field. Chassidus is essentially you're learning like archetypes. Nigla, there's no such thing as archetypes. Nigla is legal theory, and disagreements and opinion. It's about Elam Hazeh. Chassidus is about God's mind. It's a whole different thing. God's mind is one mind that has a lot of details. Nigla is a whole bunch of details. Until you don't learn that it's one Teira Achas, all these sections in Gemara, you don't bring them together as one. By the way, this was part of Ayin Beis earlier. We talked about Primus HaTeira, Chetzenis HaTeira. That's a big part of what we're talking about here. Teira emerges also as the big part of this interface in the Ayin Beis, more than Tefillah does. That's why Teira, the Mamutza, remember earlier? Because Teira is Alakus and Chachma. See, Tefillah is not a Chachma, Tefillah is Aveda. In interface, it's Chachma, and Teira is the manifestation of God's Chachma. So in Reish Pei Zayin, what we're up to is like this. In context of things, where are we up to here? The context is like this. Talking about Eidus and Kelim. Eid is Ayin, Keli is Yesh. We need an interface between Ayin and Yesh. So he talked about the different levels of Eid. And then he moved over to the Kelim, containers. The containers are the opposite nature than Eid. Eid wants to go up to the source. It wants to lose its personality. Keli is about being personality. How can these two meet? So the bottom line is they meet because each of them assumes the properties of the other, as he discussed. Understand all that, like the Rebbe Rashab said, an interesting lashon. Yes, you look in Tavkuf Pei Aleph, he says, "Val havonas ha'inyan is boyer." You see the 5 lines before the end of the kitzur. No, not the kitzur. And where are you looking? Val havonas ha'inyan is boyer. Agdama shabikelim yesh beis madregas. Havonas in you, what Havonas of what? How Eris and Kalim meet, to understand that well, begins the whole discussion here, which is around 20 pages, right, at least. All about Primis HaKelim, Chetzenis HaKelim. So summarizing, B'kitzur, Primis HaKelim is who you are, is who defines who you are. Chetzenis HaKelim defines what you do. Shem HaTayar and Shem HaEtzem, or Shem HaKinui and Shem HaPul. There's two different expressions. You know, so there's and that's both titles that we use, and also God's names. So a game like Elohim has described what he does. Elohim creates. What he is, the power to create, and it's far beyond all the potential abilities that God can create. He uses that example. So now in Teirik Reish Pei Zayin, he begins the discussion that the main place where Keli meets Eir, where Ayin meets Yesh, is in the Primis HaKelim. And the beauty of this is, as we discussed, is that on terms of the Kalim now, in terms of our Kalim, we can find a way to retrace the steps from our Yesh existence to the divine Bittul, to Bittul, by looking at who we really are. In other words, the Kalim already have described the Eir, which means the following: if there was no Primis HaKelim, let's just imagine there was no Primis Kalim. So you have your identity. I'm just using an example within our. He's talking, of course, Kalim of Atzilus here, but just for example purposes, you would have a description of who you are. I'm sorry, not who you are. What you do. What you do. What do we do most of the day? Whatever it is. What our job is. What our work is. Whether our father, or husband, etc., etc. A bunch of activities. And they say, 1 second, was that your neshama? Is that? So you say, well, my neshama on Shabbos, or when I learn Chassidus, or the times that I go to my neshama. And there's really no bridge between these two. Okay, so what you don't have is lacking a key component in interface. You can go to Elokus, but you have to shed what you're doing. Because there's no common denominator between the two. Primis HaKeli adds something. That you, the real you, as you are right now, even no matter what you're doing, the real you is a reflection of your neshama. So there's a part of you and your personality right now, even while you're at work, that's really your neshama is at work. What happens to the Chetzenis HaKeli, we'll learn later. Even the Chetzenis HaKeli has to also be elevated to that point. But at least your identity, your real identity is your neshama. In other words, what describes your name, that describes you, is really describing your Eir, Etzem Eir. So therefore you have a place to go. Your personality can therefore connect with Elokus. So if we had no Kalim, then you completely had to shed anything that's your identity in this world. And you have to be a level of Eir to connect. If you had only Kalim and no Eir, then you remain in your personality and you can't retrace the steps. If you only have Chetzenis HaKelim, you also remain in your function. Your primary role is your function. But you have now something that's in between. Primis HaKeli is like in between Eir and Keli. Because on one hand, it's not Eir, it's definitely you, but it's the identification of who you are as opposed to what you do, as opposed to your functions. And that's the step of the interface here that he's addressing here. So in simple English, you meet somebody, and you want to inspire them. I'm talking now, let's say a secular person. They never learn anything. What can you tell them that's going to get them interested in God? That's for even argument's sake, say they have no negative experiences with God, which of course is never the case. Most people do. But just for argument's sake, they're neutral. What do you get them? He's a busy guy. He has a family. Let's say he's relatively happy. Obviously if he's miserable, there's a crisis, it's always easier. But we don't. But I'm just saying, I'm giving you a scenario. What's going to get him to? So you could say to them, listen, Jews have been doing mitzvahs all their lives, it's a beautiful life, you can have a better life. Okay, the nish, But if you want to, I'm just giving an example. One way to engage him is, everybody's got great potential. You could be actualizing your potential in ways you never even realized. Who are you as opposed to what you do? It's a very intriguing conversation. So on his terms, that can intrigue him and say, you know what? You can tell me something about me I don't know. Everyone wants to hear about themselves, you know. I wanted to tell me I could actualize more potential than I'm actualizing. Yeah. If you learn a little about what you really are, so you have on his terms a way in. I'm not saying this is always the way to get somebody, but it means you're not asking him, come with me and let's go for a sabbatical to Israel for a year and we're going to learn and you're going to have an unbelievable experience. You know, he may or may not do that, but you're asking him really to go out of his routines. Here you're saying, listen, you are who you are. I want to tell you there's a lot more to you. You know what we say, like the Rebbe says, there's two ways to tell somebody that to motivate them. You could tell them, you know, if you don't become more committed, you're going to burn in hell. You know, there's going to be 70 angels that are going to spank you every morning and night. You know, there's a Gehenna Shel Shelag and a Gehenna Shel Eish. You're going to roll in, you know, with snow, and then they're going to put you in fire. I don't know if you ever tried this method, but it doesn't really work. Because usually by the time you're in the middle of your rebuke, like he says, what's it, did I invite you into my life? Who's asking you? Telling me what... And then the Rebbe never said it quite that, but he once said, he says, or you tell a person, look what kind of beautiful neshama you have. You have indispensable contribution to make that nobody can do but you. We're all waiting for you to do it. And you know, the potential that you have. And if you speak Dvarim Yitzim and love, not manipulation, you know, you really this. Which one will work? The Rebbe, I remember once my friend says, try it out and see which one will work better. In other words, it's reaching into somebody in his terms and trying to, with Ava. If you really care about him, the Rebbe, I remember, besides me, Yehudi, and the Shnei Sa'aretz, the third thing that the Rebbe would yell about, it's very, I mean, it's almost like strange, but almost in the same kind. I remember the Rebbe not yelling quite the same way, but he would disturb terribly people not using their potential. I remember he'd say, I mentioned it, God blesses you with keiches, and you don't use it. The whole Seder Shtalshlus is confused, because everything was made for you to do what you have to do now. How could you not use it? And it always struck me, that was like, and it was a big thing by the Rebbe, because you always say, if you're a writer, use your writing skills, this and this. There's no such thing. Everybody, by Fabringen, and it was very much part of this thing. It was the idea of making you feel like what Rabbi Jonathan Sachs said. It made you know what you can be, not just what you are. You saw what you were capable of, and pushed, and did not give up. Didn't say you did enough. Stenzalt says it when he asked the Rebbe about all the, he had all these jobs, all this work, and he was going to finally go to the Rebbe and ask the Rebbe which one to drop. So the Rebbe told him to do everything, and he elaborates and more. This is what the Rebbe was like. Didn't understand my dad. He said no, because the Rebbe understood the basics of science. That the atoms, atomic nuclear energy. The more you the more energy comes out of it. There's really much more potential than you think you have, and that's how the Rebbe saw something. So bottom line is, Primis HaKeli therefore is like saying on the terms of Keli, we're able to connect to something greater. So if we were just functioning human beings, this is what you function are, and you don't have anything more, then you say, so how are these two ever going to meet? You have to give up one to go. Primis HaKeli basically is a bridge between the Chetzenius you, what you do, as opposed, and here's who you are. That who you are gets into your neshama. The neshama is air, and the air connects you to the higher levels. That's what he essentially was saying here. So the main unity between Keli and air, where they meet, is he says, Ikar Avdas HaKeli Me'er B'chinas Primis HaKeli. Now what we learned inside, and I'm going to continue on next page, just to sum up, there's a whole arichas now. He begins to say, to understand this well, we have to understand that the air on its own is beyond kelim, beyond containers, is nivdal. So he says like this. I'll just read the first few lines and then. Since the external part of the keli is only to affect its function, so all function is outside of the essence. So the outer keli, your function cannot be you. Function immediately means it's outside of you. That's what function means. You're functioning. You're affecting something. So the outer keli, there's no way to connect that to the divine. so-called, your divine soul. Because air by nature, energy by nature, it's constantly being drawn to its source, and it's not be'erech, it's not proportionate to affect things outside of its essence. And even when it is, it's being compelled to do so. It's a yerida, it's a descent for the air. It's doing so, it has to do so, the kavanah, whatever the reason is. But it's not its natural gravitation. And definitely not to create this biyah, ein ze be'erech ha'er klal. Not at all be'erech ha'er klal. I just heard a story. Chanya Marozov was, masked the Rebbe Rashab, and then later the Frierdiker Rebbe. So he once brought mail into the Frierdiker Rebbe. And the Frierdiker Rebbe asked him, "Where's this from?" So he said, "From Atzilus." So the Frierdiker Rebbe said, "From Atzilus habe ich andere Träger." From Atzilus I have other delivery people. Which, I think. So, in other words, I need to bring it to Biyah, not to Atzilus. You're bringing in mail to me at this level here. I'm just reminding me because it says here. So, understand. So, air is not really connected to coming to Yisavus. It's not connected down here. So now he goes, and this is we learned inside. I'm not going to read it again. Basically, now he goes with the whole explanation to elaborate on this point. So it's a really detail within a detail. All this is to explain how air on its own is beyond creation. So he basically, to sum it up, Havaya on its own, you don't say Breishis Bar Havaya, it's Breishis Bar Elokim, because Havaya fundamentally is higher than and beyond existence and creating existence. The fact that it does create is the Elokim within Havaya. That's Havaya on its own. So all the questions we had last time, Havaya, Lashon Mahava, Yud-Kei, Vav-Kei, however you twist and turn it, it's not Havaya, the Etzem of Havaya. It's maybe the pool of Havaya. But Etzem, Havaya, obviously Atzmus is higher than Havaya too. But for practical purpose, Havaya is like Eir here. Yeah, Havaya is Eir and Elokim are Kelim. So Havaya is beyond, and all this is to explain how the Keli, that Chitzenis are Keli, I'm sorry, how Eir is fundamentally detached from creation.
But don't we refer to a person as Oros but Kalim? So when you said Kalim, you said earlier, and you probably learned it earlier, just came into the shir, but Chitzoni to Kalim and Panimis to Kalim is who you are and what you do, those two levels. But then what does Panimis to Kalim, Panimis to Or and Chitzoni to Or add to that picture? If you've already just said just from Kalim you can describe those two functions or who the person is. What is that? What a person is Oros and Kalim, so what is the Oros going to add here? You probably learned it before.
No, but first of all, we're going to learn it later more. It's a good question. Right now, he's really discussing more Pnimis and Chetzenis Kalim, and didn't really get into that. The only thing I would say briefly, just to say, shouldn't lose sleep tonight, is this, that it really comes down to four levels. There's Primus Eir and Chetzenis Eir, which he does not discuss. Just for the record, has not discussed Primus Chetzenis Eir.
In the whole Ayin Beis yet?
In Ayin Beis, but I mean in this section here. Here it's primarily Eir and Primus and Chetzenis are Kelim, right? So generally you can say is that, let's put it this way. If Kelim is the conscious part of our experience, so in conscious there's two parts. There's the function that you do and there's who you are. They're both part of obviously function is much more revealed and who you are is hidden, as he said. Like you could have a chacham, he's born a prodigy, he's not acting on it. But it's a definition of his kelim, primus hakelim. The key thing also to remember is primus hakelim is metayer. What is it metayer? The etzem ha'er, that's the language he uses. Primus hakelim describes who you are is describing your neshama, but your neshama is not the description. The kelim is a description of who you are. So air you can't really describe. You see, in the context of names, description,
yes.
Even a descriptive name, not just a functional name, even a descriptive name is already a keli, not the real. So who you are is really air, But the Primus Akeli describes who you are, and that's called Primus Akeli. So the air is I guess you could say, is the energy of who you are, and the name, the description, like when you say somebody is a prodigy, born prodigy, you're describing Primus Akeli, which is describing the nature of his air. That's the language he's using here. So he's not really discussing interface right now about air.
The Oros is a separate thing than the Kalim, so it must add something to the picture.
So you'd have to say, ultimately, here he doesn't discuss it, but in the whole interface, you'd probably be saying something like this.
Subconscious?
In the beginning of the Hemshech, he talks at length that Ur is not Keli, but at the same time, it's Ur HaChochma. So you're really asking what's the difference between Ur HaChochma and the previous Klei HaChochma. That's really the question. So you have to say that it's subtle levels. It's hard to really completely define until you learn it properly inside. I would say the following: the soul itself is indivisible. That's what he says. The soul is not made up of faculties, right? It contains faculties, not made up of faculties. The soul has Eir HaChochma in it. But the way Eir HaChochma is in the soul, this is in chapter 2, 3, 4, 5, in the beginning of the Hemshech. The way that Eir HaChochma is in the soul is an amorphous potential state. So think of the soul as a body of electricity that has the potential to have wisdom, bina, chesed, everything. But in the soul, it's only a potential faculty. It's like cheyuli is the word he uses. Potential. Now that neshama comes into a body. So now the Eir has come into a keli. And now you could say this person is a prodigy. Prodigy is not just talking about the potential of the soul's wisdom. You're talking this person actually has a personality of a prodigy. So that's Primus Akeli, what you're describing. And Eir, in other words, is compared to that is too amorphous. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And Chetzenius Akeli is of course not even that. Chetzenius Akeli is just a function of what he's actually doing. He may not even describe what he is. So that's really, if you talk about like really an analysis, if you said, here's a human being sitting in front of you, tell me the difference between the Chetzenius Akeli, Primus Akeli, Eir. Well, he doesn't. Chetzenius right now is not. I wouldn't go there. It's a whole other story. In the Eir itself, I guess there's the Eir closer to the Keli. Remember, there's Keiches Hiyulim, there's Keiches Nalamim, there's Keiches Galuyim, there's Keiches Klulim. So you could say Eir, Primus Eir would probably be Keiches Klulim, and Chetzenius Eir is already Keiches Nalamim. Something like that. Because even in the soul, there's levels. So the soul is a completely indivisible state, just energy, potential. Think like what we learned.
Or by itself.
Like almost like
Or by itself.
ak. Then akudim, so you have 10 energies in one container. Then the kudim is 10 energies in 10 containers, and tikkun.
He's exploding, Yecheskel.
So in other words, I'm trying to say to you is what you really want to understand is the evolution of how air starts with pure energy and how it slowly becomes shaped into something that will fit inside of a container. This is definitely a fundamental part of the Hemshech, but it's hundreds of pages of discussion. This I could say this is almost keeps coming back to all the time. This is like a continuous flow. I'm just summing it up. But so the bottom line, what we're doing is something that is completely indivisible, getting into something that's completely distinct. And the layers are the Primus and Chetzenius of it. So here, where we are right now on the map, is the place where Primus Akeli meets Eir. That's what's relevant to this.
So the
By the way-
Primus Akeli is what defines the Chatzonius HaKohen, that is the Slavish. In that Keli.
Yes.
Otherwise, you wouldn't know what the Keli is altogether.
Yeah. Like I'll just give you one visual example that the Rebbe Rashab gave. He gave 3 examples for this. Remember, if you broke him back. That period before he began between the Chetzenius Akelim. This is a very fundamental period. Reish Pei Daled, by the way, 284. So he gives an example of the wick, where the wick meets the flame. So there you go. Let's take the wick and the flame, and that's what he's going to find. The wick is a keli. Flame is Eir. Clear? Now, if the wick was not a wick, if it was a piece of metal, it wouldn't burn. So it's not just a keli, it's a keli that's conducive to the Eir. So the idea, the wick has 2 parts to it. There's the matter of it, pure matter, but it's a matter that's edler and more subtle, that it's receptive. It's fuel. It's fuel fuel a flame will catch. And if the wick is wet, or the wick is not in appropriate properties, the flame won't catch. So the wick, you see right there, Chetzenis Akeli, and there's a Primus Akeli. The Primus Akeli is where it meets actually the flame, refined oil, any fuel really, fuel. Water won't burn. Water's a keli, but it's not a keli for air. So that's on the level of the Primus Chetzenis Keli. On the air level, you also need two things. Air on its own doesn't have any connection to a keli, but there's the lower part of air, Chetzenis air. It has an element of let's call it a little coarse, some particles that allow it to connect to flame. So he says the lower part of the air assumes the properties of the keli, and that's why they can meet. Now this is the pure interface. That's why it's a logical system. Now a miracle would be if God suddenly said, like Shemin l'Shemin Yadlik, suddenly water would burn. That's a miracle. That's on God. Atzmus can do that. We would not be able to. There's no interface element there. He's just taking two opposites and making it work. Or like the miracle of Hanukkah in a way. It burned. There was no fuel, and it burned. Stuff like that. So the bottom line here is you want air and keli to meet. So you can find this in any situation. You really come down to four levels, and the Shtaim Shem Arba, and the two that meet are the outer keli, the outer air meets the inner keli. But right now he's not right now. That he'll get back to that. Gets back to it, I think. Later.
No, I'm saying the fact that he did mention that the air and the kalim, they have to do their opposite function. Right. Each one has to do the opposite of
Exactly.
what they really are. It means that the chitzonius air, which is not really oil, so to speak, has to connect with the pnimius keli, which is not really keli, so to speak. So to speak.
But we must say that also the Pnimius core must also connect to Chitzonis Akalim.
Yeah,
But it doesn't. That's not the system. The system. Yeah.
That's not the answer,
Saying
but
earlier that the whole Chassidus, the uniqueness of Chassidus, is that it unites Pshat to Sod. All parties, it's all united through Chassidus. Those are four levels, so they must relate to the four levels of Pnimius or Chitzonis or Pnimius.
But the main thing I want to say is
You're right in essay on that.
You're at the Mashiach's times already.
You're going too far.
You're going to Mashiach's times.
No. What you're doing is, I would just say it's like this.
That united field that you were talking about.
No, I totally agree. But I'll be honest, to really appreciate, you're gonna have to really learn it inside. Because there's a lot of pieces here, and it's more complicated. Again, if you're talking purely mathematically, scientifically, this is the idea. But if you want to talk application, where you stand in each level and how you apply it, that's a whole other story. Like just a practical question: how much a person is really a keli for ruchnius? And also changes from day to day, our moods and other stuff. Sometimes you're more refined, and sometimes you're less. So it's really understanding all those levels. Right now, the bottom line, to get back to where we are, we're talking about how who you are is connecting to the you, basically, the neshama. Now, all this, remember, is Atzil is not in Biyah, so it's not even really, all this is partial for us, but really you're talking here on that higher level. So now goes all arichas, how Havaya, which is Eir, is basically removed from existence. And it goes back and forth. Basically, a lot of this is based on the Geras HaKedesh Simachov. So what's the Lashon of Geras HaKedesh? The Geras HaKedesh says, I'm on the bottom of page Tovkuf Peyal, I'm just summing it up, Bal Peh. It says, Masha Kosa Bera
No,
Kedesh.
Simon, you do much faster if you say it inside.
Yeah, we wouldn't learn it.
Iyu v'garmu yichad, that he and his kelim are one. Garmu here is an interpretation of kelim. Livre yesh ma'ayim. Like he says, livre behem v'al yodam yesh ma'ayim. So who's doing what here? So he dissects this like this. Obviously, Kayach Habriya, Kayach Yesavus is an Atzmus. Nothing else can create but Atzmus. Like he says there, only Atzmus yesh amiti. He has no cause, nothing beyond that before him. He has the power to create a yesh that has the senses that has nothing before. But how does he do it? What's the dynamics of this? It's not just Atzmus creating. So Eir carries the Kayach Atzmus. Eir carries the Kayach Atzmus because Eir is an Einam Moir. Because of its bittul, it has no ego and personality of its own to get in the way. Because if it did, it wouldn't be able to create. It's like Moshe not looking at Atzmus, if you want to put it that way. So Eir is completely selfless, so it just carries that Kayach Yesavus. But the language is that it happens through the Kelim. without the artist. So the artist is Atzmus, his hand, or his power to not, I wouldn't say his hands, his ability to create art is Eir. You know? Because if he was just Etzem, he's not creating any art. And the palette, and the brush, and the ink are the Kelim, the instrument. I'm just giving you an example. So, someone says, so who's creating? The instrument doesn't. The instrument is a gazim b'yad ha'chesev. It's an axe in the hand of a wood shop. It's just a tool. But without it, the artist is not getting a picture on any page. So remember, hisavus is not a potential state; it's an actual state. How do you get hisavus? And again, al pi seichel. Atzmus can do anything. Atzmus can only get paint on a canvas without paint and without a brush. But that's not what we're talking about here. So the process.
What was those 4 levels? The etzem is the artist, the hand is...
The hand, not really the hand, his ability to
Right,
create,
it's
to
like
conceive, create art.
is-
Sorry.
Or,
Or,
and the palette,
then the palette and the instrument, the brush, I mean, you know, whatever it may be. And the canvas is and the painting is the savos. Creation is the painting. So now, of course, we look at the painting and we're wondering where it came from, but it's another story. But essentially, let's retrace the steps. The painting tells you there's an artist. But it's not just there's an artist. An artist used an instrument to create. And it's that instrument that is our interface. That's how we get back, is through the instrument. So essentially, the Lashon and Tanya, that's what he says. He's one with his instruments. But the instrument is the tool through which he creates. So he says this is the language he uses. That's why it's like a back and forth. That's why I gave the example, because so now he's suddenly saying, not just Chitzenis HaKelim. Remember, this whole point of all this is to tell you that creation and existence is apart from Oyer. Oyer is removed from it. And the bottom line he wants to conclude is that Primis HaKelim, therefore, identify more with the Oyer. Chitzenis HaKelim are only the function. Think of Chitzenis HaKelim, the function of the instrument drawing the painting. That's removed from the Oyer itself. But he has to explain the process here to see. So he's explaining like this. So Havaya on its own, the artist on his own. Let's put it this way: in his own reality, he's not even an artist. He happens to be an artist. That's not his essence. His essence is far beyond art. Okay, but now he wants to manifest in art. That is removed from his. So Havaya is how he is on his own, and now Elikim is how he is now acting as an artist. Okay, that's what he's saying essentially. How does he do it? It's through, like he says, now he says, I will follow your advice.
No, it was a joke.
No, but this Ima Yesh is critical because he doesn't really finish this Ima Yesh till the next page. Makol Mokum is later. So anyway, that's just it. So even though the general containers will Yesh Sisavas and Nevrayim Dibiyah, the Mashakos by Gereshkesh Iver Gemilchad Livrei Koyal Klosa Kel Gam Primis HaKelim. We just said that Primis HaKelim is removed. It's only Chetzenis HaKelim. The fact, however, is Kelim is in order to create. So we see that the Kelim do have a connection to create, and that includes Primis HaKelim. So somewhat of a question here. Okay, Shari Savas Humina Eir. The Savas comes from the air, the energy. A paintbrush can't create. Painters can't create anything. It's the air that carries the power of the Atzmus, or the air that carries the power of the artist that creates. But the truth is, one second, the power of creation is the Kelim, because without an instrument there's no creation. So you see, this is the subtle element here. The instrument can't do anything without the artist, but the artist is removed from doing anything without the instrument. So bottom line is, Havaya is removed from Isavos. Even though the real power of comes from the artist, but the artist fundamentally is removed from it, and it's the instrument that's really the place where he's able to, through the instrument he's able, because if the artist really was not removed, he wouldn't need an instrument. Just do something, he wouldn't need an instrument. The fact is he needs Elikim to create. I mean, he wants to need it, basically, obviously. That's what he's saying. So, okay. So if you want, Yeah, no.
Who's actually
Back and
creating?
forth, it's just-
It is creating.
Depends how you
Well,
look at
through
it.
Atzmus is created.
Yeah, well,
to be-
yeah.
Yeah.
But you see, it says the Koyach HaYesav is Bu HaKelim Dafke. In other words, let's put it this way. If Atzmus didn't have Kelim, his Koyach of Yesavas would never manifest. It would manifest in concept, but a world like ours would not exist. Just like an artist, God forbid, an artist didn't have hands, or an artist didn't have a brush. He could have the best painting in his mind, it's not getting anywhere. He has no paint. He has nothing to use. It's like an author has a book inside of him, but he has no word processor or no pen. So Koyach HaYesavis is in the Kelim. But doesn't mean the Mahava is the Keli. Let's not confuse that. Like I said, Gazim biyad hachetzev. It's the instrument in the hand of the artist creates. But the instrument is the Koyach HaYesavis. I mean, that's really what he's saying. It's no contradiction. That's saying Koyach HaYesavis in the Kelim and not in the Eir. Hamahava. U'kamesha amar iyu v'gamu yichad livri b'hen v'al yoda. Hari iyu hu hamahava. It doesn't say garmuyi are the creator. It says iyu v'gamu yichad livri b'hen v'al yodon. Through them, b'hen, with them, and through them, he creates. I was talking about b'hen v'al yodam. It's interesting. It means that in this case, you see, because the instrument itself, b'hen, in them and through them. It creates in them and through them. B'hen v'al yodam. That's a lashon in the Gersa Kodesh.
With it.
Yeah,
The
Bohem
boy
is-
the with.
B'hen is with them and v'al yodam is through them. What's the difference?
So that's a keli and all.
No, but
No, it's about the Keli. It's about the Keli. The Keli says Bohen Val Yoda.
So Ihu is what? Ihu is
Diuk.
No. Chayu is Iyu is outside. Okay, so let's say Iyu is the air. Fine, but livrei b'hen v'al yodam. The b'hen is definitely going on Gamui. There's two things. Livrei b'hen v'al yodam in Gamui. B'hen and al yodam of Gamui, not air.
For thinking that the Bohem goes on Ihu and Aviodam goes on.
No.
Abba.
Bahan is the Indian of Riboy.
Bohen.
Without the Keli, we
The
wouldn't have
EU
the
goes
Bahan
Bohen.
Hari Iyu amahav. Shari Savas u'ma'atzmus dafke. So Savas comes from Atzmus. That's what I said. V'alkena eir li yosi David ba'moyer, and because eir is bound, is connected to the source. Shu me'ein hamoyer, and it's similar to the source. Hari hu amahav. Commissioner Koseber Gerish. Okay, so that deals with the Atzmus and eir. Eir is David, and therefore me'ein. And we learned that earlier, the three levels of eir. Okay, fine. Rak shemina eir be'etzem yev shalias yisavas. And is a behen v'ayidei shal hakelim. He says it again here. So from eir itself can't be yisavas. Like from the artist, cannot be without a brush. Without the brush, without the instrument. That's why usually yisavas. And is a behen v'ayodom shal hakelim. I think the Rebbe explained. I'm trying to remember. It's definitely because the kelim. The difference in the example is that the instrument is just a deaf and dumb entity. The kelim of Atzilus are not deaf and dumb. They have personality. Understand? Because we said the kelim is who you are. See, the instrument is just a tool. The instrument doesn't have a personality. The kelim do have a personality. No, imagine the instrument. Imagine the brush has a personality. It can talk to you. So that's why we the behen, because the kelim come alive. It's like the body. Your body's coming alive. It's not just an instrument. It's not like a pen. Like your fingers actually. So I think behen is like through behen with your fingers and through them. So it's like it's getting into the fingers and also and the fingers can write something on paper. Something like that, to think it through, but that's probably the Behen of Al Yodam.
How does it fit Al Yadam Shel HaKelim? Is that grammatically or?
Yeah, because Al Yodam means literally Al Yodam means through their hands, but Al Yadei. No, but he means shell. He's saying he doesn't say Al Yadei HaKelim. He says Al Yodam Shel HaKelim.
Al Yodom Shel.
Behen Al Yodam Shel HaKelim. Through the hand, it's essentially through the handles of the kelim. That's like what he's saying.
The interface of the kelim.
Shakelim makbilim esair, Because the containers, this is the reason why the instrument does it. Because the air on its own doesn't have any limit. So how is it going to get onto a canvas? Because the kalim limit the flow, the energy, so in a way that allows for savus, for creation to take place. Just in case we forget about the interface, there we go. This is the interface of Atzilus. This is the interface between Ein Sof, the infinite divine light, and the worlds. Interface in these two parts. These are the two levels of Ein and Keli. The Eiris have no limits. The Kelim have a confined. And they limit the Eir. The Ayin Hagbola u'becholos hakelim, that Atzilus gam b'chinas primis hakelim. He's going to take it back to the Holy Sabbath thing, but so also primis hakelim is Hagbola. And now he has to reconcile this with what we learned in the previous chapter. Previous chapter, if you remember, we learned who you are is your infinite potential. What you do is finite, because you can only do that much. You say someone's a prodigy, or you say by Elokim, that they to create, it's infinite. So how can you just say that it's finite? The previous chapter. The primus hakelim and b'chinas blikvul. So the answer is, it means they don't have the limit of Chetzenis HaKelim, but they are defined. In other words, they don't have the limit of how many revelations and how many different types of revelation. Like when you say...
Basically, Steinsaltz could have come up with many books, but he couldn't become a dancer.
That
was what you meant.
Exactly. But it's a name after all. Remember, Primus HaKelim is also a name. So there's the definition of the name, there's a definition of the Tayar, the description. He's a Chacham. He didn't call him a Chesed. Exactly. So yes, in the product, the difference between Shem HaTeir and Shem Pa'ula is a person who's, right now, he's actively functioning as a wise person. How much wisdom he really has, we're not really sure. Like he gave all the examples. Maybe he achieved it through effort. Maybe he's just good, he grasps things and someone else's ideas. But a prodigy is someone who has actually a prodigious mind. So he explained the prodigious mind doesn't define how much it could be. It's an unlimited amount, but it's a mind. He's called him a prodigy. He didn't call him a Baal Chesed. So when you say Chesed on the other hand, so there's a definition. That's by the way. Eir doesn't have that. Eir doesn't have that at all, relatively speaking. So bottom line is, Kelim, even Primis HaKeli is still an instrument. However, it's an instrument that is unlimited in its potential, but it has a shape and form, and it's giving a shape and form to the Eir. Where Eir is a blikvul. It's essentially the difference between blikvul, I guess, but quantity or quality, you know. The Chumash is bought, as we shall explain. So there's more to the story.
What's quality mean?
I would say quality, in other words, it's chokhmah, not chesed. That's the gvul. But in quantity, it's bli gvul, primus hakelim. How much chokhmah?
I mean, it's not true bli gvul. Could you say that? I mean, a person, even when you say he's a chokhmah, he's a prodigious person, he's still limited. I mean, even the Einstein, even the greatest genius, even Moshe Rabbeinu, even Shlomo Melech, there was nobody greater than him in his wisdom, has a limited wisdom.
Okay, so
how does it
Yossi, we had this whole dilemma, ein soif last.
So it's not, I mean, once it's defined by an individual...
Well, let's put it this way. We had this discussion, but but you have to think of it. Remember, the prodigy is an example I'm using from Elam Hazar. But if you're talking about Chachma Vatzilis,
right.
So Chachma Vatzilis, the language of Chassidus is that it's ein soif l'spashtuse. It's only Chachma, so it's not Bina. But horizontal flow,
Linear.
linear flow can be endless because it's alakus.
Yeah, but we say Moshe Rabbeinu's from
But we're not talking. Let's not talk humans now. Let's talk about Chachma of Atzmos. Chachma of Atzilus as a chelik of alakus.
But limited to Moshe, to an individual.
No individuals.
Because
Chachma of
how could
Atzilus.
you talk about Kalim? Kalim's already limited. You've
Kalim-
already got one Kalim.
No, it's God's Kalim.
What?
It's
Oh,
God's
you're talking about
instruments.
God's
This is
Kalim?
all a
You're not
muscle.
talking
The
about-
artist is all a muscle of the
Yeah,
Lila.
think of
It's
it.
all a muscle of
Once
the
you
Lila.
have a Kalim, once it's differentiated, it's limited by its definition.
No,
That's
so
the whole
no.
idea, that it's bleeding
It's always
bulls.
connected, even Panemius.
Eliezer, one second.
Listen,
In the Chassidus.
I'm sorry, getting excited over it.
No. Entitled. And
please, somebody.
No, it's a good question, but let me just say, in some of and also in Ayin Beis, he has 3-4 different explanations to demonstrate that what you're saying is not accurate. No, I'm because initially it seems that way. But remember, you're talking about kalim of the lakus, so the question is, what kind of gvul are these kalim? That's the question. So there's a few explanations. I think actually he's going to say a few of them here too. One of them, just for the record, is that the keli limits the flow outside of the keli, but the kelim themselves are unlimited. There's that
Chachma is
explanation.
not being, but it's an infinite Chachma.
So the kelim limit the flow outside of the kelim, but the kelim themselves have an unlimited amount of chokhmah, literally unlimited.
That was your thing.
That's one explanation. That's not the only one. There's other explanations too.
I gave up on it.
Remember, we're not talking from the bottom up. Forget about humans and forget about Earth. We're talking about how Elokus manifests in air and mountains and kelim. And we're talking about, there are many ways to understand. Remember, at the end of the day, a keli is also energy, but it's defined by parameters. Kelim are parameters. Questions are the parameters in width, breadth, and length, or only in, let's say, in width, but not, that's.
You'll explain it to me.
Yossi, I'm telling you, you have to not think Mamatla, I think Mamayla, you have to think of what is real bleak vul on all ways, and then think like this. If bleak vul, let's say, real bleak vul, if we could envision it, would mean something would spread in every possible direction. You know, unlimited, like you said. It's not just Chachma, it's everything. There is a level in Elokus where you can't even call a sphere Chachma. You know, let's say in the Yechelos Atzmos.
Right.
The Yechelos Atzmos, Chachma being everything is one. But then there's a point where it's an imagination. There's a point where this Atzmos decides I want it to be Chachma and not Bina. But it's still an Atzmos Dikakeach. So it has properties of infinity, just not for some reason, in some way he's able to say, you know what, I'm going to take my Bligvul, I'm going to put it all into a narrow area. It's a contradiction of terms in a way.
Right.
But he's putting it in, but he's calling it Chachma.
Mathematical infinity.
Vertical.
It's infinity within parameters. That's the term.
No, but the question is, that's a contradiction of terms.
Because it's infinity, then
No,
there's
but
no
it's not,
parameters.
Infinity is
it's not
vertical.
true
Vertically.
You're talking about the Amos just
So that's
what do you mean?
No.
But you know, true bleak vul, by the way, is even if it's just because it's not chachma not being, it's also not necessarily true bleak vul.
Right.
True bleak vul is like he says, is shlila chiyuv, shlila shlila. There's so many bleak. We talked about numbers. It's like, for example, this infinite set of numbers in mathematics is infinity, for all practical purposes. You know, it's infinity.
Which, by the way, it's an 8. Which
Right.
is Shemer Sehekef.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Now. But it's an 8. But it's an 8.
No, the
Number 8.
Number 8
On its side.
in mathematics. Number 8.
It's a side, yeah, but it's on the side. But it has to be like a shikar.
It's like a shikar, exactly.
Yeah.
Number 8 this way means infinity.
So was that
Not
Does it show?
Huh?
It's my mistake.
No, in
Shmeina is
Chassidus,
Shemer Hekef.
the number 8 is Shemer Hekef,
Shiva,
which
7 is Gvul,
Yeah.
and Shmina is the Shemer Hekef. It's exactly right. And by the way, the reason it's like that because it's a loop that goes forever.
Oh, Pat, what's that? Power.
Yeah, it's forever. No, but I want to say it's like this. But even an infinite set of numbers, it's still numbers.
Right.
So that's the comment. And then there's Atzmus, where even numbers don't make it. Like the Abiel was told us the name of Meshach Gedari, he would say that it's Bli Gvul, and all Gvul are equal to it. In other words, 1 and a trillion are the same compared to the Bli Gvul, but the Bli Gvul can't say that you don't exist, because you're still numbers. Then there's a Bli Gvul that says even what you are has no value, not only what you're not. Not only what you're missing, even what you are has no value. So not Tefus Malkim, the whole thing doesn't matter. Anyway, so, okay. Mokom mokim. This is the Eisphere. Remember he said im hayes. So even though kelim in general are there to create, no way out. What do they say? You can check out, but you can never leave.
I know what you're referring to. Right?
Remember, everything comes from Kedusha. That's the way we can say. Once the Alter Rebbe saw somebody, you can check out, you can never leave.
You know what he's referring to. Yeah. But
And Nigan, how you do?
you don't know.
You know the song that you're
I know. I'm good.
Okay.
So remember, the point he wants to make here is that Eir on its own is nivdal, is separate from, distant from Savos. And the Chetzenis HaKelim are therefore distant because they're the function. Every function is outside of the essence. So it's outside of the Primus HaKelim and definitely outside of the Eir. But then we just elaborated that the Kelim are necessary for Savos, including Primus HaKelim. So now he comes back and says like this. Even this Hisavos, even though Hisavos, creation, the artist must have the instruments to create, including the Primus HaKelim, but there's a fundamental difference, there's a big difference between the inner and outer containers. The Primus HaKelim call Mokum calling Yonim Hulakabla Sa'er. Primus HaKelim, at the end, after everything is said and done, they're Kelim, but all in Yonim is, their whole purpose is to receive ulatayir and to describe the energy, the light. And legalas is that means to reveal the air. This is important, not how it's diminished, but how it is in its real personality. We'll explain in a minute. Let's just read